You got any of your releases handy? The original copies or anything like that?
Yeah. So there's the master tape of it.
Oh wow, for Beyond Scathing.
These are the typewritten labels, and that's the same with the cog dominance. There's the other Birthbiter tapes.
Yeah, beautiful, nice green.
And there's the Prevail again.
Hello and welcome to White Centipede Noise Podcast, where we give language and a face to noise through long-form interviews with those involved in the underground. I'm Oscar Brummel, and today my guest is Mark Durgan of the legendary UK industrial noise project Putrefier, known for his earlier works on Broken Flag, Harbinger Sound, and his own imprint, Birthbiter, as well as contemporary works under his own name. Mark shared a new Putrefier track with the White Centipede Noise Patreon that subscribers at the WCN TV tier can download now. This is part 1 of the episode with Mark. To hear the full-length episode, you'll need to subscribe at patreon.com/White Centipede Noise. Once you do, you'll get access to this and other full-length podcast episodes, our dedicated Discord server, WCN TV content, and much more. This episode is sponsored by Rural Isolation Project. Visit ruralisolationproject.com for releases from Black Leather Jesus, Hare, Moosehead, Scathing, and more. Or check with a distro near you. Thank you to all of our Patreon supporters, and especially our generous partners and sponsors who make White Centipede Noise Podcast possible, as well as WCN Studios, a brick-and-mortar space dedicated to noise in Potsdam, Germany. Here, we produce White Centipede Noise Podcast, WCN TV content, and are open to the public as a noise-exclusive record shop. Come by our grand opening on February 22nd, 2025. We recorded our first in-person episode here last week with Max Klebanoff of Death Kneel and B. Traverse of Nimiami. You can watch or listen to it now on WCN TV at patreon.com/White Centipede Noise. Hello, Mark, and welcome to White Centipede Noise Podcast.
Hello, Oscar. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for joining me. We are going to talk today about Putrefier and your work in general. But Putrefier being a legendary classic industrial noise project that's been active for a very long time and is still active today, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, going, but
yeah,
not too much being released out there, but yeah, it's going.
Well, you recently played in New York City as Putrefier, correct?
Yes, yeah.
And there have been a handful of releases in the past several years. But I'd like to first take it back to Beyond Scathing, which, if I'm not mistaken, was your debut release. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
1986?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about making that release and what was the impetus for making that release and also creating your own label, Birthbiter, which I believe it was also Birthbiter 1, the first release on the label.
Yeah. There's a few labels I was interested in and some music they were producing, and around that time I was going to put a fanzine together, and I decided it didn't come together in the end, and I just decided to start a distribution and a label. So that came about like later, 1986, 87, and at that time I was in touch with Broken Flag, various other labels, mainly in Europe, and my name got out there a bit more, and various people got in touch with me, and I released some recordings by Anthony DeFranco as Ethnic Acid, and we did some recording together, and it's just getting in touch with labels, the labels like Dom in Germany and Aachen, was the Spender Geometrico label, various other things, magazines were Force Mental and the Birth Death Compendium. They were one of my first distribution items that I did. It didn't go into anything majorly big, but it was just kind of selected stuff that I was interested in. I wanted to distribute at the time and thought it deserved a bit more of a wider audience.
I have right off the bat a question from a person on the Discord. They want to know what the origin of the name Birthbiter was, and if there was a meaning behind the green covers.
Well, I like the color of them. I suppose the putrefier reference might be that kind of tie in with it a bit more sort of decayed, sort of gangreney sort of look. I don't know. Um, but I mean, I think it was just names I was kind of words and stuff I was trying to piece together and come up with something. I don't think there was any majorly. I suppose like quite a DIY aesthetic behind the covers, quite just mainly Xerox and collage put together really.
What was it that inspired you to make these types of recordings though at this time? I mean, this was your first debut release. Of course, the 80s in the UK were a ripe time for power electronics and noise, but the earliest time, and it still was probably pretty rare to come across and figure out. And I feel that your work, the Putrefier stuff, is kind of stands out from a lot of the other type of noise and industrial and power electronics that was going on in the UK at the time.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the interest was and always has been is like a blend of electronic and acoustic sounds, and I always think they go side by side. I don't think they're separated at all. So if, like, for instance, I didn't used to use a lot of environmental recordings. It's mainly metal and some tape, noise, radio, and synth. I mean, for instance, the recordings that I do remember standing out for me were like the organ of New Blockaders Pulp 7-inch, the like the Ferial Khan Fine Andrew Chalk stuff, which was kind of coming out around then. Some of those Control Bleeding cassettes on Broken Flag, like Sense Maker, that had a mixture of kind of operatic and acoustic sounds, and I liked the diversity of what was being produced. Because there was a lot of static overload electronic stuff, which was a bit too one-dimensional for my taste. But I preferred something going on a bit more. But
Scream and Writhe presents a series of off-season Initial Shock shows in Montreal. March 1st at Maison, Bloomer, Taskmaster, Primitive Isolation Tactics, Generic Fatigue. March 28th at Casa del Popolo, Green Tea, Jute, High Grove, Ingress, Miox. April 25th at Petite Hours, Nyan, Shadow Pattern, Zach Rodin, Skin, Foul. Keep an eye out for another Initial Shock presentation at the Suoni per il Popolo Fest in June, followed by the third edition of the Initial Shock Noise Fest, the weekend of July 5th and 6th. Full fest details to be announced in the spring. Sign up for the mailing list at screamandwrithe.com or follow at screamandwrithe or at Initial Shock MTL on Instagram to stay in the loop. So when I kind of introduced you in the intro here, I mentioned industrial noise, and that's a term that I have used. I don't know if you identify with that or not, but when you mentioned the interest in combination of acoustic and electronic sounds, I think that does fit the bill.
yeah,
But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the term industrial and what it means to you beyond perhaps just only sound. Like, what does industrial art, industrial culture mean to you beyond maybe it sounds like this or like that?
do you mean in a visually or
Yeah, I
in?
mean, what makes certain bands or artists or visual artists or authors kind of associated with industrial? Is there a certain like world outlook or philosophy or anything like that that you connect with the term?
I suppose it. I mean, it will have to have its sort of groundings in like this 60s, 70s culture, and then I think the interpretation in the early 80s kind of brought it home, and that's how it's refined itself, I suppose. Um, I mean, I suppose, harking back to like early performance artists, um, like Jean Drangely or kinetic sculpture or actionist work. I mean, as industrial sound goes, I think it kind of it does stem more from an avant-garde perspective rather than any kind of um, I mean, especially, I mean, I wouldn't never consider industrial music after, um, say, maybe 1984 when it became more beat orientated, or around 1983. I mean, I don't think industrial music is like beat music, like EBM stuff.
Yeah.
I do. I'm quite a purist in that respect. I kind of think it does have to be. Um, More in a stripped down way, and not, it's not disco music,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, then if you
Um,
do have that specific scope of it, how would you define industrial music in that earliest sense? What is key to industrial music?
um, I suppose, do you mean groups or particular artists or?
Not necessarily particular artists, but if you can identify like the characteristics or the of the sound or of the approach, like what
Yeah,
makes something industrial music in the purest sense.
I suppose the kind of unsettling aspect, kind of confrontational, um, and I mean, especially, hand in hand with visuals and sound. I mean, for instance, I've got some records here,
Yeah, show 'em.
and something, like for instance, the SPK record. I
Yeah,
mean, that's a very industrial looking record, isn't it?
yeah,
It's
exactly,
on industrial anyway, but
exactly.
so it's going to be. But I suppose, I mean, yeah, like I said, I mean, like with um, particular artists. I mean, you can I kind of define, like, Joseph Boyes or some of the Otto Mule early junk sculptures that he did. I kind of, take inspiration from kind of how you could marry that in with sound and culture, and how visually and also, various music concrete stuff that I've always been interested in, electroacoustic music and some sound poetry stuff, things
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm.
I mean, obviously, your taste changes a lot over the years, so I'm kind of trying to hark back to thinking what my where
Your
my
mindset was
inspirations
back at the
come from.
time.
Yeah, because yeah, obviously, yeah.
Well, then tell me about your release on Broken Flag and how you got in touch with those guys, and then talk about cog dominance a bit if you could.
Yeah, so I suppose the recording techniques of which I was using was pretty primitive, as with a lot of people were doing. But it was a tape deck that my brother had, and I just able to borrow another two tape recorders and plug straight into this tape deck. So this is my multi-channeling, and I overlaid stuff using this method, and um, the beyond scaling was kind of overlaid in that way, but Cog Dominus is kind of a bit more, kind of got a little bit more to grips with, making it sound a bit less lo-fi than it
Hmm.
was. But still, I mean, I think those recordings were put together fairly quickly, and they were released quite quickly, and so because of the limitations of the equipment that I was using, it was kind of more of a challenge. And but in a way, it kind of made me more productive to do something in that way, where it was, I was trying to challenge my ways of doing it, rather than when I got a 4-track, that kind of challenge kind of wasn't there as much. I kind of
Did
I
you
kind
miss
of
it?
hmm?
Did you miss the challenge?
Listen, um, not. I'm not really. I'm not really sure why it should have something that was made easier for me to do. Kind of took away from what the scrappiness of what I did before. So I
Is that how
kind
you feel
of
about it? I mean, your work is so dense and multi-layered, and you hear that on the earlier stuff too, but on the later. So I am curious to hear. That's interesting to hear about the Beyond Scathing method, and I'm curious to hear more about how you did things going forward. Not including what you used, but also how you used it.
mm,
And that now that you
yeah.
mentioned the mix of the acoustic and the electronic, that kind of gives me a hint of what you're getting at. But I'm really curious to know more about how you generally worked back then, and also going forward, how that evolved.
Yeah, I think, I mean, lots of cheap equipment, um, which I've also brought
Yeah, show me if you
to
could.
show you at some point. But
Yeah.
so, I mean, some of the pedals, these are the pedals that I'd use. Like the real cheap bargain basement flanger that you'd get.
Wow.
There's a Vox phaser as well.
Are those still cheap bargains? I mean, those are
They're
probably
probably not
nowadays.
anymore.
Those probably nowadays very very valuable, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, yeah, I mean that was what was off, cheap at the time. That was my major expense was this
Mm.
this digital delay which I bought. So that kind of made me think, right, I've got to do some recording now because I've just spent a load of money on that digital delay. So I think working with cheap mics, I think even on like Cobb Dominants, there was like I was hitting the mics with the cymbals, and it was kind of all done quite. There was an urgency in trying to get something down. Plus the fact that my brother didn't like me using his tape deck because he thought I was going to break it. So we'd like to, with this stuff, so I'd use it when he was out. So it was kind of this urgency about trying to put stuff together.
How old were
Um,
you in these early days when you did your first releases, recordings?
um, would have been about 17 or so.
Wow.
But
So
so
you're still
I mean,
living at home with your brother and your parents.
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So I mean, when I was at school, they had an EMS synth EA in the music room. So that was kind of my first introduction to sort of. Well, it wasn't my first. I had a Genesis 1000 synthesizer, which wasn't very good, but um, so I was kind of interested in synthesizers and electronics, but it was
Mm.
all yet to be really developed, really, I suppose.
Can you talk a bit more about your recording progress or process? Because it seems like there's a lot of physical energy in your albums, and it seems like there's a lot of elbow grease and work that's gone into them. Despite that, you said that some of them were done quite quickly and urgently. Was there, as you went forward, was there a lot of compositional thought, editing, experimentation, kind of focused work that went into some of these releases that are quite complex and dense?
Um, I think say with Cog Dominance, it was more. I think I worked with two channels, a left and right channel. So I'd record one bit, and then I'd of something I found interesting. Then I would change it totally and find another bit. This is all on the hop, really. It was so I would stop, edit. Well, there wasn't really any editing as such. It would just be coming with the next passage that I was working on. And then, because I don't know if it's really that lined up. I think the first track lines up and then it comes into the immediate second track. And I think there's a mixture of sounds that are, some go on a bit longer. So it's not totally matched up.
Mm-hmm.
It probably should have been, but it was, again, not really having the technical capabilities to sort of do that really. So
So you're like
I
playing, you're like recording and then hitting stop and then kind of like punching back in and going further from
with
that point.
something else, yeah. And then, I mean, I suppose the 4 tracks should have sorted all that out. I didn't really get on a lot with the 4 tracks, so which I'm not entirely sure why.
Hmm.
I think the impetus of doing something on the hop had kind of been taken away a bit with it, which I should have really continued. I don't know why why it did
Well, what
go
about
that.
later releases as they went on? Because Cog Dominance and Beyond Scathing are obviously the first early years, but you've been
Yeah.
doing things steadily through the 90s and the 2000s as well, and they do have an evolution of sound. Were you using the 4-track then going forward, like about the LP on Harbinger, for example?
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I have to get some context here because I've got. So this one is, I think, from. So that's before simulated vapors.
Mm-hmm.
That's 4-track stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think I did. What was the other? Yeah. Then there's the Trace Element Syntax CD, which is that is reel to reel and like a karaoke machined
Mm.
microphone setup, and it is immediate noise microphone. That you can hear it on tracks like I use that a lot. This is this thing.
Oh, cool. That's the
I
karaoke machine you're talking about?
Yeah, because Andy Bolus turned me on to one of these, and
Yeah.
I was a bit skeptical. I'd never used toys before, and then he and when I started using it, what Christ, this is like really it was kind of quite destroyed and kind of like immediate sort of crunch of feedback. So it kind of worked out okay, and I used that along with this. This is what I've had forever. This. Which is a
What is that?
realtor. So this is pretty much on all the early recorders.
Okay.
So, and it's all valve, and it just I just get my hands in there, getting slightly electrocuted at times.
So you're using it as a source for tape. Are you using loops, or are you using recorded single reels?
Yeah, I was trying to do the loops, but it was kind of quite a I think the heads were, it used to be quite muffled, really. A lot of the time. So I was trying to get away from that a little bit. I didn't want it to like particularly muddy someone's. So, but
how were you? How were you using that reel to reel? What were you using it for exactly?
Well, for instance, I used it a lot on Trace Element Syntax, and I was using it with a gate, and I was using it as I was opening the spools up a lot, and I was recording and like going back and fast forwarding and kind of speeding up sounds, and that again, it was kind of a bit of a. I mean, I think on that CD, I haven't listened to the CD in a long while, but I think it really could have done with being edited quite a lot better.
It sounds of it. I mean, like I said, it sounds. You can hear on your work a lot of different layers going on, and a lot of kind of stop and start, and this constant kind of modulation and rhythm and flow without it resolving in beats. But I'm also wondering about what your kind of. I mean, it's hard to describe, I'm sure, but just your methods to get those kind of churning, crunching, flowing sounds that kind of flip on and off. Like you hear a lot of that, and I see you use pictures sometimes of gear, and you seem like you are using beyond just some pedals and toys. You're using kind of other outboard rack mounted kind of gear things. I mean, when I see pictures of you, you have a lot of kind of machines on your desk.
Yeah. But, a lot of circuit bed stuff, just self-oscillating stuff. Yeah, it, and when you say about rhythmic, it is. I mean, obviously, there is. I think there's the basis of the Putrefier sound is like a lot of it's to do with percussive sounds. I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of I have to make that distinction to punctuate some of the noise so as to try and keep the flow going and keep and the interest, I suppose, in what's being produced.
Are there any specific feelings, ideas, or topics that Putrefier is about, or that you're trying to convey with Putrefier?
What social sort of things?
Not necessarily social, but personal, or are you anything specific? That doesn't have to be. I mean, maybe there aren't, but I'm just wondering if if there was any sort of conscious goal or conscious thing you wanted to convey or feeling you wanted to get across.
I I think it's more. Okay, there isn't. The message is more in the sound of what it's trying to produce, but it's trying to create an environment of an altered kind of state of different elements coming together. I mean, it does stem from collage, be it music or art, and it's just trying to piece stuff and cut it up in a not in a totally disjointed way, but try and bring it together in a cohesive way and make it sound interesting, I guess.
How did the contribution to the Pure series come about?
Yeah, I think Ron sort of proposed an LP, and then he opened up the Pure series, and then I think this happened. The CD kind of had been something I'd been working on. That initially I sent it to Praxis, Dr. Behrman, and they kind of wanted something a bit more similar to my older stuff, and so Ron was interested in it. So he just, there was a track missing off it, I think. But Ron was.
A track missing that you submitted that he didn't put on the CD?
Yeah, and I understand why he didn't want it, really, because it was weird. It was at a Smell and Quim performance in Leeds. I can't remember what, he must have been around 95 or something, and all of a sudden I'm working with that reel to reel and the karaoke machine and trying to get it all to kind of gel a bit. It was kind of like it wasn't, it was a kind of destroyed sound. It wasn't particularly going anywhere. And then all of a sudden he hit Diz Willis, the saxophonist from Smell and Quim, appears, and he's blowing his saxophone and improvising with my set. He didn't ask me or anything. He just appeared, and it kind of saved me a little bit, I think. So I went with it. It got recorded, and I stuck it on, and and Ron did like, he goes, "You got to get rid of that stinky saxophone track." I said, "No problem."
Yeah, I guess that's curation. That's a label's job, I guess. I mean, as long as he checked it with you. I thought you meant he just didn't put it on without telling you.
No, he did. He did mention it, but I don't know. I must have recorded something else for it.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. I mean, the whole Pure thing. I mean, I was reading back on the book that just came out. I think it all kind of seemed like it all came together quite quickly and then finished or something. Was it a 5-year plan or 3 years plan or something that he was on doing? But I think it went on a bit longer than that, didn't it? But
I haven't read the book yet, but if he did that in 3 or 5 years, that's quite remarkable, because that's a huge discography. That's a huge body of work with so many legendary releases by such important artists. I don't know. I kind of assumed it had spanned much longer.
Yeah, maybe it did.
Can you tell me about kind of the British scene around that time? You mentioned Smell and Quim, who have quite a reputation. Bolus, Olympic Shipman. I would like to hear about those sessions as well. But a lot of strong characters, a lot of it. There's something specific about British noise, and I can't put my finger on it, but there's something specific about it. It seems like a lot of the British people like to like to drink and like to party pretty heavily, and that happens together a lot. And there are a lot of stories about kind of seemingly rough nights, I feel like, among the British
Yeah,
noise crew. What was
yeah.
that like back then?
um, yeah, I maybe it was just because it was like a bit of a kind of rare event, so maybe that was why people were partying hard around it. But yeah, you're definitely right in saying a lot of drinking was going on, and oh yeah, other things. But it was, I mean, the whole. I mean, like for instance, like Leeds, you'd have Smell and Quib, you'd have what were the other bands? Dog Liver Oil.
Yeah.
You know,
Leeds is in the north, correct?
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
okay.
Condom,
Mm.
Exposure Eyes. There's quite a few sort of people that knew each other and were doing quite similar things. So in London, for instance, you wouldn't. I mean, doing like more noisier things. I mean, I think it was kind of quite rare to come across. I mean, me and Andy got together, I was really kind of. I think we were both kind of quite pleased that we kind of were, working a similar frame of mind of what we wanted to produce and put together. I mean, because you had like bands like which were probably trying to be more kind of industrial. That's another thing. I mean, you get bands that are kind of follow a particular um, set of industrial ideas rather as opposed to I mean, the distinction
Yeah.
between noise and to how people like, were influenced by, I don't know, Einstein's and Neuvel or something. But I mean, I'm not using them as. I'm just thinking of how people kind of more um, influenced by more mainstream stuff as opposed to
Yeah.
obscure stuff.
Do you think
If
that's
that
a
makes
key
sense.
to industrial music? Or that is that it's kind of each artist is original?
Well, then on that, or
Then, I mean, like
in general.
in your pure terms, in your pure kind of definition,
Um,
or is originality not like the most important part?
I think I think technique and sounding different is. I mean, I like for instance, I wouldn't be able to kind of have um, a global view on the state of noise or in power electronics or industrial music because it's something that I don't have enough knowledge about. But that back then it was kind of like it's a lot, even like, okay, we're talking, say, around about 30 years ago or so.
Yeah.
It wasn't an oversaturated market. You could pick and choose a lot of stuff. And I mean, I think magazines like Banana Fish were kind of covering pretty much everything that was coming out at that time. I seem to remember seeing a few issues, especially like Japanese stuff. It was just like you kind of knew what was there and what was available.
Mm.
So today, yeah, very. I mean, there's just with everything, isn't it? It's very saturated. I
Yeah.
would like to know a lot more about what is going on with stuff today, but it's like I say, back then it was kind of a bit more. You weren't spoiled for choice, really. You were able to
Yeah.
kind of just, stuff would come along, or you'd see it, or go out and see it live, and it would generally make an impression, I guess.
There's a lot now. There's so much now, and
Yeah,
it's really hard to, even as a someone who follows it
yeah.
very, very closely, it's still so much to sort through and hard to
It
really.
sounds, it looks insane. Whenever I see that noise now playing
Yeah.
on Facebook, and there's like people with a stack of tapes, and it's like I have no idea
And
what
they all
that
came
is.
out
It's
like
like,
last week.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Tell me about working with Andy Bolus on Olympic Shitman. I've seen some photos of those sessions, and I talked to Andy a couple times, and I think he did
mm,
mention a little bit about that, but what was that like from your perspective, and how did you guys put those together?
I think most of it initially was recorded up in Andy's. I don't know if I'm repeating myself because some of this is in As Loud as Possible magazine, but we recorded it a lot in his loft space, which was quite small, because he had like various kind of just big metal contraptions and stuff. But I suppose, I mean, what the equipment that I've showed you,
Mm,
especially that, I used that a lot in those recordings.
yeah.
Um, that's digital delay pedal, but again, probably using with quite not loads of equipment. I had the Wasp, various few pedals, but again, not with huge amount of equipment. I mean that supercharged tape does sound quite varied. I really like it. I still like
Yeah.
it. I think it's great, but
Can you remember your mindset at all, or what you guys were up to at that time, kind of mentally, during those sessions, beyond the technical side of it?
I suppose we were, well, apart from drinking as well. I suppose I think it was we were. I mean, what was coming out at that time, music wise? I mean, a lot of the Japanese noise stuff. We were quite in tune with that stuff, really. Um, and there'd be a lot of because I was still doing my record distribution. I was distributing a lot of like Vanilla and Alchemy titles, and so we were kind of quite locked into that sound, I suppose, and we were trying to reproduce, put our own angle on it. And Andy had, there's a video on YouTube where he's got this rotating speaker on a washing machine motor. I think it's in a drum, and it's at that Bar Say show. And it's supposed to be. I think the way it works, it's supposed to be feeding back each time it goes around, and I think that used to get stuck a lot. So there was kind of like, and he was introduced quite a few kind of gadgets like that into the mix, and we were, yeah. So it was good sort of fertile period for ideas and stuff we were doing, and then it gelled really nicely. We were both on the same page with that, so. And we were into a lot of films and stuff, so we were socializing quite a lot. I think he was working at a phone call center. I was working in I think a record distribution at that point. Yeah. Yeah. So none of us had a particularly exciting job. So it was kind of it was, it was, it was good fun. It was a good time to be in London actually. And we did a show. We did a few shows around that. Then we played at the Termite Festival in Leeds. We played with Ramley in Nottingham. I don't know about that. Was something Steve Underwood put on too.
Mm.
We played at Bar Say with Condom, and there was, we seemed to be, people wanted us to play, so it was all right.
Tell me about your relationship with Steve Underwood. You've released quite a bit in Harbinger.
Mm.
How you got to know him, and what do you see as his importance in the UK industrial experimental scene?
Yeah, I bet. I think Steve got in touch with me when I was doing when I was doing my own distribution, Birth Bite stuff. He got in touch with me. And he was buying stuff, and then we were, in contact quite a lot backwards and forwards. And then he was starting to move into putting shows on, and I think the first time I would have met him would have been that Ramlo show. I think that was about 94 or so, 93. And then he put it on the Third Organ Contagious Orgasm tour, which I did a few dates on that.
Mm.
So that would have been the first time any Japanese noise stuff had come to UK. I think that was 96, I think. 97.
And is that the tour that birthed the split between Third Organ and Putrefier with the
Yeah,
with
yeah,
the
that was
live.
it.
It's a live collab recording, right?
Yeah, that was at the 121. No, the 1 in 12 in Bradford. Yeah, yeah.
Do you have any
That
memories
was
of that show?
um yeah. I think I've again working with quite minimal amount of equipment. This is me working again with the reel to reel and the uh this thing, the karaoke machine. So
Yeah.
it's I think it was at that point where I kind of really needed it. There was kind of a realization for me, thinking I've got to get rid of this gear. I've got to get some new stuff, and I did. I just had to like just change my whole mindset about stuff. So it was just, I got a sampler and various other things, and just decided to just reinvent the sound a bit, just move it up a notch. Really, it was just kind of not going anywhere with what I was doing.
Was that before playing with third organ, or you mean afterwards?
I think afterwards, really.
Mm.
But we're talking about Steve, aren't we?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think Steve then he went on to put a lot of live stuff together, like he invited me most of the time. So it was all I mean, especially up until I don't know about 2012, maybe a bit more, and then the band that dare not speak its name came along, and kind of I think everything went to pot after that, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not so much live stuff, and then yeah. So I mean, I went been to Japan and stuff. So that was organised mainly by Steve and Koji Tano,
Yeah.
um, Yasutoshi Yoshida, I think.
It seems like he's kind of single-handedly responsible for a lot of stuff in the UK, but also connecting it internationally. I mean, not, of course, no one
Yeah,
single-handedly, but it seems like he really just put a lot into making things happen, making tours happen, making records happen. And what I also
yeah,
think was interesting is, which you don't really, it's a common sense music strategy, but not as often practiced in kind of underground noise or things like that, is like the combination of releasing a record and then touring that artist for that record. You know, like we release this record, now we're going to go on tour for it. Um, it he kind of organized that. It seems a number of times with artists he released, and you don't see that kind of intentionality often or dedication to the whole package as much.
no, and I think he had it. He had like a good rolling stock of stuff that he was just constantly putting out and moving on.
Tell me about your desire to collaborate. You've done a lot of collaborations. Have most of them been live in person collaborations?
Yeah, mainly. Yeah, they would have been mainly face to face. I mean, I've just done recently with the Spores and Radix guys up in Nottingham. Um, and one of the guys lives in Hong Kong, so he sent some stuff over. So hopefully something might happen there. The K2 one was definitely through the mail. Um, the the OSM one would have been, yeah, that would have been stuff that me and Andy did both together. Hopefully doing some more as well at some point.
You and Andy?
Yeah,
That'd be great. That'd be
well,
exciting.
yeah, I think we're sort of having talks about trying to get something going again. Um, what else? I can't remember what the other ones were. So the third organ one was the live one. Um, I mean, the stuff I done with John Wall. I mean, that's not Putrifier stuff as such, but that's all done at his studio.
I'm aware that you use um, a lot of more modern synths these days, and I suspect some modular synths
Mm.
and things like that. How would you think that would have affected your approach or sound if you'd had it in those early days?
Oh God, yeah, I know. It's I was thinking about that recently.
This is the end of part 1 of the episode with Mark Durgan. In the full version, we go on to talk about Mark's current setup, working under his government name, playing the Dead Gods show in New York City, the New Blockaders, compilations on epitapes, Mark's most influential records. We see original Birthbiter tapes and artwork, and much more. Visit patreon.com/White Centipede Noise now to finish the episode.